I dated a guy whose father was a short-tempered and isolated man, who was also a truck driver and a skilled hunter. He would come into the room with all of us laughing and saying how much he wanted to strangle us and carve our eyeballs out. And everyone would laugh and say, "Oh, Dad." Once for Thanksgiving, I was in the basement, and he came down. He didn't know I was down there, and he was talking to himself about how to perfect the glaze, lay it on thick, and how nobody would suspect it. That day, he wouldn't let anybody else cook. Didn't eat any of the food himself. And everyone in the house had diarrhea, stomach pains, and vomiting. Before I'd left for good, his dad took a truck driving job to be trained in South Dakota. We were in Kentucky. Nobody heard from him for 2 weeks. But he called crying from the state of Mississippi, saying he lost his wallet and ID and needed help home, and how he missed his family so much. Nobody asked any questions at all. They got him back. It stuck in the back of my mind how he had started Uber driving that New Year's in the city. And there were a few stories of women that had gone missing around that time, who were never seen again after getting into an Uber. So for context, I'm 25 now, and I had this encounter when I was 17. This took place in rural New Jersey during the summer. My best friend lived in a small neighborhood with one entrance point. Across from the entrance was this big empty field. We decided this night we were going to go lay a blanket down, smoke some weed, and look at the stars. We had already been smoking for months at this point, and never had any kind of hallucinations. We just got the normal, good old baked. Around 12 a.m., we decided to walk back to her house. It wasn't a far walk, but we both felt some weird tension. As we first started to approach her driveway, I remember saying something along the lines of, "Oh, thank God we're back." But as we were more than halfway up the driveway, my best friend stops walking and goes still. I look at her, and she is staring straight ahead at something. So I follow her gaze. There was this thing, crouched down over some metal thing in her backyard. I'm just a girl, so I can't be sure, but I think it was the septic tank or something similar. Anyways, it sees us staring, and immediately all three of us are just completely shocked. Neither party was expecting this, it seemed like. In a flash, it stood up from being crouched down, and easily stands at 7 feet tall, if not taller. It was so white, like a literal sheet of paper, and very, very lanky. We stared maybe another 1 or 2 seconds longer, as it ran across her backyard. Each step it took had to be like 6 feet wide. It covered her yard quickly and easily. Her and I turned, grabbed hands, and ran for our lives to the front door, which was locked because we snuck out the back. We stood there for a couple of minutes, convincing each other it was a deer, until we gained the strength to run to her back door. Once inside, we were silent for a few minutes, until we both looked at each other and said, "That was not a deer." My best friend has since sadly passed, and I always wonder, as someone who believes in an afterlife, if she got some clarification as to what that was. I, a 25-year-old female, had an experience about 4 days ago that I haven't been able to shake. I was dog and house sitting for my boyfriend while he was away on a backpacking trip. My boyfriend's home is in a semi-remote area at the bottom of a hill at the back of a few acres of property. He's right next to the highway, which was opposite to us as a small rural neighborhood. It's both very sketchy and very safe, meaning that the community is close, but people frequently keep to themselves. And there are lots of abandoned and dilapidated homes right next to the very well-kept homes. A pretty typical countryside neighborhood. So I really didn't feel unsafe to agree to watch my boyfriend's property and his dog, Hennessy. Hennessy is a 115-pound, jet black American Bulldog, Spanish Labrador mix. He's basically all muscle, and ever since my boyfriend and I began dating, he's become very protective of me and my own dog, Lottie. Lottie is a 57-pound poodle mix. I'm a dog groomer, so she's usually done up in pretty silly haircuts, with bows and everything. All of this is to say that one of my dogs is very intimidating, and the other is not. Because of his strength, however, I cannot walk Hennessy and Lottie at the same time on my own, and so I usually walk Lottie alone, and then go back and get Hennessy to walk him alone. We do about 30 minutes of walking each, and I like to take Hennessy after Lottie at night, because I feel safer with him as it gets later. This is important, because this was the case about 4 nights ago. I was about 3/4 of the way through my walk with Lottie when I got this really weird feeling that I was being watched. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I looked around to see that about 30 feet or so back, there was a tall man in a hoodie standing next to an older, run-down home. I instantly thought the hoodie was weird. I live in Northern California, and it's early August. It doesn't get colder than 87 degrees in the evening, especially when the sun was still setting, like it was at the time. I forced myself to brush it off, as I tend to be fairly paranoid due to my years of reading "Let's Not Meet" stories. As I kept walking, the sun kept setting, and the streets began to slowly get darker. I would glance back from time to time and notice that the man was keeping pace with me, not breaking that 30-odd foot distance. If I turned a corner, so did he. If I sped up, so did he. Finally, we reached the highway, and I crossed right before a car came speeding past, hoping that if the guy was following me, this would put some distance between him and myself, which it did. But that didn't stop him from continuing to follow me. I walked as fast as I could to the house, not wanting to turn around, but now being able to hear his footsteps on the gravel. At this point, Lottie had noticed him too, and started to bark and growl. I forced her to keep moving, and thankfully, made it back inside the house, slamming and locking the door, hoping that that was the end of it. It was not. Moments after I'd shut and locked the door, I felt someone trying to open it. The dogs heard this too, and started barking, because they always do when someone is at the door. There's no peephole on my door, but I can talk to whoever's on the other side. It's a pretty thin door. So I yelled out and asked who was there. Through the barking, I could hear a man's voice. "I love your dog. Can I meet her?" For some reason, the way he said it was so creepy. It was like there was nothing behind it. Kind of like he'd rehearsed the line, or decided to say it beforehand. I yelled back, "No," and asked, "Please go away." He paused for another second, and then again said, "I love your dog. Can I meet her?" He starts trying the door handle again, this time pushing up against the door. By this point, Hennessy can tell that something is wrong, and so can Lottie. The hair on the back of Hennessy's neck is standing up, and he's mashing his teeth while growling. At that moment, I don't know what possessed me, but I threw Lottie into the bathroom behind me and grabbed Hennessy by the collar, keeping him close to the door with me. He's still barking and going crazy.
I love your dog. Can I meet her?
I hear the man repeat that he wants to meet my dog, and I yell out, "Leave!" He paused, and then slammed into my door. I saw the door move, and at that moment, I unlocked the door and opened it just wide enough that Hennessy could get about halfway out. He's going bonkers at this point. My hand is starting to hurt from holding him back. I can hear his teeth clacking as he ferociously chomps towards the man. Well, this dude was not expecting Hennessy. He stumbled back, almost falling over, and cursed as he scrambled to stay off the ground. He didn't even look at me, and instead booked it up the hill as fast as he could, and out of sight. I managed to pull Hennessy back in and called the cops to tell them what had happened. I never got a good look at the guy, and they basically told me that there wasn't anything I could really do, but they did take my statement, and told me that they'd contact me if anything ever came of it. I am so thankful for Hennessy. After all that, I snuggled up with him and Lottie that night, and cried because it had all hit me how terrifying that was. I literally went out the next day and bought him the biggest bone I could find, from a pet store nearly an hour away, because he'd earned it. I also got Lottie a little something too. I don't know why this creep didn't get the hint when I had 2 dogs barking inside, but my assumption is that he didn't really realize he was hearing 2 barks, or assumed that if I had 2 dogs, they were both like my puffy poodle. That is to say, he wasn't afraid. I'm so thankful the guy didn't have a firearm, and looking back now, I probably should have just called the cops and kept my door closed. But I hope that maybe, because he saw Hennessy, he'll know not to come back and mess with us. Because if he does, I'll let my big sweet boy rip his arm off. When I was younger, I used to go there all the time. My cousins, who lived in London, would also come up to visit from time to time. Well, one time I was sick, so I didn't go. When my mom got back, she started telling a story to my dad about what happened. She was trying to keep quiet about it, likely wanting to not frighten me, but I overheard it regardless. What she said sent shivers down my spine. My older cousin was stood in the living room with my mom and auntie opposite her. They were just talking until my cousin said something terrifying, like straight out of a horror movie. "Who's that little girl stood next to you?" she said to my auntie. There was nobody there. But that's not the only time something like that happened. One time, I just sat on their stairs while my mom was chatting with my aunt in the kitchen. To get from the kitchen to the living room, you had to walk past the stairs. So my mother went into the living room for some reason. And what happened here scared me so much, I couldn't sleep. When she walked past, she saw a figure move across the top of the stairs. It was only me, my mom, and my aunt in the house. I knew this because she looked up there and gasped. Then she went to go ask my aunt if anyone else was in the house. Years later, I asked my mom about it. She said she remembers it and says she was so scared inside, but tried to hide it. Another instance was when me and my brother had to sleep over at their house because my parents were away. Neither of us could sleep all night, so we resorted to talking. We talked about so many things together, and we were both having fun. My uncle and aunt were in bed in the house, but on the complete opposite side of the house, we heard a shh, which we both assumed was my uncle, even though it seemed really loud and close to us. I was thinking about it recently, and I can't really shake the fact that something is off. The shh was really loud, and it sounded like it came from a lot closer than his room. Now I just can't stop thinking about something. What if it wasn't him that night? So, this happened when I was a kid. Our house was surrounded by woods, and there was only a few neighbors around us. Every once in a while during the night, at around midnight, I would lay in bed because I couldn't sleep. I felt the creepy vibe, like something, or someone, was watching me. Sometimes I would hear footsteps coming from the attic, above my bedroom. It sounded like someone was walking around. I went outside my bedroom into the hallway, and everyone in my family was sleeping, and their doors were closed. So I went back to my bedroom and closed my door. I was laying in my bed again, and I heard the footsteps in the attic. Then I heard something fall in my closet. I was so scared that I ran into my parents' bedroom and woke them up. They were confused at first, but then I explained to them what I heard. My mom and dad said it was probably just my imagination, and they didn't believe me. They walked with me back to my bedroom and looked around, and then they went inside my closet. There was a board game that had spilled all over the closet floor. It was at the back of the shelf, at the top of my closet, so there was no way that it could have fallen without someone pushing it off. My parents helped me clean it up and put it back on the shelf. They said that there was nothing to be scared of, and then they put me back to bed. They went back to bed too, and a few minutes after they left, I heard someone whispering something. It sounded like they were calling my name. Then I saw a shadow that looked like a person walking across the wall by my closet. I thought it was a ghost, and I started freaking out again, and I grabbed my pillow and blanket and went to sleep on my parents' bedroom floor. After that, I slept on their bedroom floor a few more nights. Eventually, I ended up going back to sleeping in my bedroom. And when I would lay in bed again, at around midnight, I still heard the footsteps in the attic. And that continued, every once in a while, until we eventually moved away. To this day, I still don't know what or who that was, but it still freaks me out. I was 8. My sister was 5. We got it in our heads to walk home from school instead of waiting for our parents. They were late. It was a pretty rural area back then. We were enjoying the sun, feeling like grown-ups, when a silver sedan slowed down by us. A man with a mostly bald head black gloves and a big smile, leaned over and swung the passenger door out. We had to step around it. He said that our mom was sick, and he was sent to come pick us up. I started getting a bad feeling. I had never seen this man before. He said, "It's okay. Get in. You like candy?" He gestured to a small pile of Halloween candy on his burgundy seat. His eyes were on my sister. He only glanced at me. I took my sister's hand and tugged her along while saying no, like my dad taught me. He started backing up, keeping us in his open door. He told us to get in the car, over and over. The smile was gone, and I will never forget the way his gloved hands squeezed that steering wheel. He shouted at us to get in the fucking car. I was starting to cry and was beyond scared. That's when he tried to grab my sister. I yelled at her to run, and we did. The maniac actually kept backing his car up. There were only fields and abandoned lots. I heard him slam on the brakes. I knew we had to hide. I pulled my sister over this old wooden driveway-like thing, built like a ditch, and into one of the abandoned lots. It was severely overgrown. I pulled my sister down onto the ground, into some really tall grass. She was crying. I put my finger to her lips, and she got quiet. We stayed hiding on our stomachs, while I heard the sounds of a car door closing, and footsteps walking through the gravel on the side of the road.
Fuck.
Swearing. More footsteps. Passing car. A car door closing. An engine. Car driving through gravel. We stayed and stayed. I felt frozen. I was so scared. After a few more cars whizzed by, I slowly raised up my head. He was gone. We ran home, our hands glued together. We made it home. That was one of the most terrifying days of my life. Oh, and my mom wasn't sick. I was laying in bed one night, unable to sleep, when a memory resurfaced. It was one I'd occasionally think about, or rarely retell, but tonight it struck me as particularly disturbing. Maybe because it's the sort of thing you can only completely appreciate the possible implications of when you're an adult. I'm not sure if this story belongs here, but it is true, nonetheless. I'm around 13 years old, getting ready for school one morning. My dad is off at work, and my mom is getting ready for hers, I think. Every day, I'd walk to school, as it's only about a half a mile from my home. I'm ready, and head out the door, saying goodbye. I walk down the hill of my yard, and down the curved street, in the direction of the school, out of sight of my house, but not far. I reach where my neighborhood ends, where I would cross the street and towards the intersection of the school. But before I do, a dingy-looking black minivan, or van, not really sure how to describe it, pulls up in front of my path, poised in front of the road, parallel to my neighborhood. A car I had never seen before in my neighborhood, nor since. I look at the driver, and he's looking at me. It's a pasty Caucasian man. It looks like he's in his 30s, at least. He has disheveled brown hair But what struck me was his eyes. He had dark circles under them, and a very uncomfortable stare. His window is still up. He then motions me towards him with his hand. My heart begins to pound. Every part of me is saying that this is not a good man. So I just stand there, looking at him, and shake my head, no. Part of me had the feeling he was going to jump out, so I got prepared to run. But he didn't. He didn't even respond to my gesture. He looked at me, unfazed, before briskly pulling out of the neighborhood, into the road ahead. And he was gone. I don't remember what happened next. I think I ran home rather than towards school, as I was very startled. I told my mom, either that morning or later that day, and she told my dad, who's a policeman. He called me into the living room. He was on his work laptop and wanted me to describe the man and the car for him. I didn't have much useful info to give, as I was a dopey middle school boy who wasn't prepared to memorize plates or was really all that knowledgeable of cars. Unsurprisingly, my dad never found out anything about this man, with such sparse details. The day came and went, as just an odd thing that happened to me, and nobody had any reason to bring it up again. Every so often, I would remember the time of this creepy man beckoning me towards him in his dingy black van, but only recently has the thought filled me with so much dread. It's possible that if I were to have walked up to him, that I would never have been seen or heard from again. Just another middle schooler who gets swallowed up by the world and disappears. No witnesses. Just an unsolved mystery and a forever grieving family. I shudder to think about what could have happened to me, as I know now what people are capable of. Death isn't nearly the worst thing. Or maybe it's all in my head. Maybe he just wanted some directions, or to ask me something, even though his window was closed, and he looked unwell, to say the least. The worst part is, I'll never know. Maybe it was just the overblown anxiety of a kid taking things out of proportion. All I know is that every part of him was screaming to me that there's something wrong. Remembering how it felt, looking into his eyes, I can't help but believe it. But what's worse, the idea that before or after it happened to me, he might have beckoned a kid who didn't shake their head no. Let me start by saying, the story I'm about to share happened almost exactly 4 years ago. And there are a lot of things that I do not remember, so some of the information was told to me by others after the fact. That being said, everything is true and really did happen to me. In 2020, during the pandemic, I had just moved into a really cool, old second-floor apartment on my town square. It was the first time I think I had ever lived completely alone my entire life, and I was truly in love with the place. One day, in late July, I had left to go shopping, and had locked my apartment, something my mother had practically pounded into me from my childhood. I never left my doors and windows unlocked. When I got home from shopping, I noticed a few things weren't where I thought I had left them, and I mentioned this to my cousin, Michelle. I told her I thought someone might have been in my apartment when I was gone. After discussing it with her, we came to the conclusion that I must have just forgotten I had moved the items myself. and didn't think about it again. A couple nights later, I was up watching scary movies until about 2 in the morning, when I decided to get ready for bed. I remember walking into my bathroom to change into PJs and do my nightly routine. That is the last thing I remember, until I woke up the next day. When I got out of bed, I immediately noticed something was wrong with the clothes I had on. They were those PJ shorts that had drawstrings around the waist. I always tied the drawstrings to make them fit, but when I stood up, the drawstrings looked like they had been broken. They were still tied, and were practically falling off of me. I told myself I must have moved around a lot in my sleep, and the string must have snapped or something. I headed to the bathroom for my morning routine. When I walked by my bathroom mirror, I turned to look at myself, and I didn't see anything wrong, but I felt really weird. Out of sorts, I guess, you'd say. Even more so than usual after I first wake up. The longer I was awake, the stranger I started to feel. I noticed I had a headache, and my vision was kind of blurry. I went to grab my phone from my nightstand to check what time it was, but I guess I had forgotten to charge it before going to bed, because my phone was dead. I took my phone to the living room and found the charger and plugged it in. I stood there and waited for my phone to come on. When it finally did come back on, I was completely shocked to find that it was 4 o'clock in the afternoon. This was highly unusual for me, because no matter what time I go to bed, I usually wake up around 7 or 8 in the morning. This is when I began to feel slightly panicked. Like I said, this was not normal for me. I began rubbing my face and my hands, and that's when I felt something was wrong with my face. I ran back to the bathroom mirror. This time, when I looked into the mirror, I discovered my vision was so blurry that I couldn't even see my face. No matter how close I got to the mirror, it looked like a dense fog, or like when you take a super hot shower and the mirror fogs over. Except that I had not run any hot water at all. This is when I realized something was very, very wrong with me. I was disoriented and confused. I walked back into my living room to check and see if my phone had charged enough so I could call a family member or a friend to come over. The phone was only at 5%, but I decided I'd just keep it plugged in and try to call Michelle or my son. I picked the phone up and then stared at it. I could not remember how to use my phone to call or text anyone. I knew that I knew how to use my phone, but for some reason, I did not have the ability. I was beginning to get very upset and scared, but most of all, frustrated, because I knew that I knew how to use this phone, but my brain would not register that I did at all. Soon after this, a flood of messages and missed calls came through, and I was finally able to text a friend and told them that I was having some sort of an emergency, and I needed him to contact my sister to get someone to my apartment ASAP. My sister lives in an independent living facility because she was born with CP and cannot walk. She relies on a wheelchair to get around, and I knew she would not be able to physically help me, but could get a hold of my son. I was becoming more confused the longer I was awake. My sister had gotten a hold of my son, and he was on his way. I thought I should probably go downstairs to unlock the door to the stairway, but I was feeling so strange and off balance that I sat on the steps and inched my way down. Unlocked the door. It was already unlocked. In my confusion, I actually locked the door. And I went back upstairs the way I went down, by sitting and inching my way back up. Soon, I received a call from my son, telling me the door was locked, and he could not get inside. So I had to repeat the entire process all over again. I opened the door, and my son, along with his girlfriend and my 7-month-old granddaughter, took one look at me, and his eyes widened in shock, and he said, "Jesus Christ, Mother. What happened to your face?" I had no idea what he was talking about. I went back to my bathroom mirror and discovered a horrific sight. I had a goose egg in the middle of my forehead, the size of a tennis ball, and my right eye was completely swollen shut, and I had one hell of a black eye. My left eye was partially swollen as well. It certainly explained why I slept for over 14 hours straight. All the confusion, the headache, and blurry vision I was experiencing. I informed my son of everything that I had done, that I remembered since going to bed the night before. But I did leave out the fact that the drawstring on my shorts had been broken. Michelle also showed up and told me I needed to go to the ER and get checked out, as we kept discovering other injuries on me beside just the goose egg and black eye. I had bruises in the shape of large fingerprints on my upper arms. They are not my own. I am tiny, 5 feet tall, and only weigh about 117 pounds. It sort of looked like someone had been standing in front of me, facing me, and had grabbed my arms to shake me or something. Then we noticed I had red marks around both my wrists and both my ankles. I also had rug burn type injuries on my shins and knees. I was still very confused, and I have absolutely no memory of what took place in those 14 hours I was sleeping. It's just a nothingness, a black hole in my memory. Even when I try to remember it now, which I don't force, but I do think about on occasion. I was taken to our local hospital's ER, which is really nothing more than a glorified Band-Aid station. The nurse practitioner on call kept asking me what happened, even though I kept telling her that I had no idea. Maybe I fell or something. She then asked if I was in a relationship with someone, and I informed her I was single and was not seeing anyone at the time. She didn't believe me and had the nurse call the police. I was confused. So I get why she didn't believe me, but then she said, "Well, if you don't remember what happened, there's not much I can do, but I can tell you with 100% certainty that you did not cause these injuries. Someone did this to you." The police never came in to talk to me, and I was discharged into the care of Michelle. I couldn't be left alone due to my condition, so it was arranged that I would be staying the night with Michelle and my aunt, Kay. I was told if I started getting nauseated, or began vomiting, or my confusion and headache got worse, to call an ambulance immediately. And that's what ended up happening, about 2 hours later. I was horribly dizzy, and I had tried to eat something, because by this time, it had been over 24 hours since I had eaten anything. They got me something to eat, and I began hallucinating. At first, it was just auditory hallucinations. I was sitting with my aunt, on her bed watching TV, when all of a sudden I noticed that the movie we were watching had completely different dialogue, that I didn't remember being in this particular movie. Then the characters in the movie began speaking directly to me. I don't remember what they were saying, and I kept glancing between the TV and to my aunt to see if she was hearing the same thing I was. I was totally aware that I was hallucinating, but I had absolutely no control over it. Then the paranoia started. My daughter called to check on me. She lives in a different town, and even though I was on the phone with her, I was convinced she, along with several other family members, were all outside of the house, talking about me. That's when I started vomiting, and my cousin called 911. When the ambulance showed up, the police also showed up, and they were talking to my cousin. When they asked me what hospital I wanted to go to, I told them the name, and my cousin, who knew me very well, knew I would never ask to go to this particular hospital. A story for another time, perhaps. However, because I seemed with it enough to the paramedics, and I kept insisting that this is where I wanted to go, that's where they had to take me. I wish now that they had listened to her. Because it was incredibly late at night, the hospital I was taken to was 25 minutes away. No one in my family met me at this hospital, and the hospital did not even try to call my family for information. I don't remember what I did, or what I said to anyone after that. I was so confused and hallucinating that it must have been bad, as I was committed to the hospital's psych floor over a traumatic brain injury for 11 days. 11. So, another story for another time. I still to this day have no recollection of what happened to me. But I really don't want to remember, seeing as all the medical professionals and my own healthcare providers who saw my injuries say that I had been attacked by someone. It's scary to think of all the possibilities. Was someone actually hiding in my house that night without me knowing? Could it have been one of the carnival workers I saw walking around the town square earlier that day? Worst yet, was it someone I know and still have in my life now? I'm not sure which is worse. Not knowing it all, or having the memories of it forever. I was living in an old farmhouse, first built in 1873. The old owners said the house was haunted, but no one really believed that, except myself. I was able to see spirits and talk to them ever since my grandfather passed away. The spirit in this house wasn't your normal one. It was a demonic spirit. One stormy night, in the middle of December, I was home alone. My family was on a trip, and I was going to the kitchen to get a glass of water when I heard a weird hiss. A cold chill went through my body. My back felt like it was on fire. So I went into the bathroom, pulled up my shirt to see 3 long scratch marks on my back. I decided to yell at the spirit. This is my home. I'm not going anywhere. You'll have to do something much more scary to get me to leave. The spirit didn't like that so much. When I walked out of the bathroom, I went to reach for my cup of water, when it was tossed off the table and shattered off the wall. Next thing I knew, the power went out, and all night long, I heard a man's voice hum a very dark tune.